Okay, so we had the fun royal story just before, and got to balance it out here because there's been a lot of talk in Australia lately. About last month, 60 Minutes, basically a major journalistic program, as well as the ABC's 7:30 report, Four Corners, foreign correspondent have been all talking about the foreign interference of China in Australia. Uh, Chinese spies trying to infiltrate our parliamentary system, uh, bribery money laundering at Crown Casino. It's just been all sorts of things about China in Australia. Asia, even, they usually just don't talk about these things. They went on public saying that they're overwhelmingly spending all their resources just investigating what China's doing in Australia. So on that light, a story came through today where they're going to take over one of the major dairy brands in Australia. So let's have a quick look at this, and I'll do some comments as we go along.
Well, in a deal worth $1.5 billion, some of our most popular milk and juice brands could soon be Chinese-owned. Mengniu Dairy will acquire Melbourne-based company Lion Dairy. Now, that owns key brands like Pura, Daily Juice, Farmers Union, even the old Big M. Now, our finance editor, Ross Greenwood, is here with us for more on this one. Roscoe, what do you make of the Chinese? We had the baby formula buy-up last week, and now this as well.
Yes.
That was Bellamy's. Bellamy's had bought up, I think it's the same company that bought up Bellamy's, is going to buy the Lion Dairy, which owns, most of the milk in Australia.
So they bought Bellamy's last week, the big infant formula maker. That was about the fourth biggest in Australia. So once completing that and getting approval from the Foreign Investment Review Board and the Treasurer, they've then moved on to buying Lion Nathan's old drinks business. So this includes, as you say, some of the biggest brands in Australia. As you say, Daily Juice, you've got Farmers Union, you've got Pura, you've got Yoplait, you've got Dare Ice Coffee, you've got so many of these brands. Now, the big issue about this is our farmers. Remember how tough the dairy industry has had it. The $1 milk thing, the whole thing has caused a problem. Just a small thing for you that most Australians don't know, and that is that we import dairy products into this country because we don't make enough of it here in Australia. In actual fact, milk production has been declining because dairy farmers have just got out of the business. And so the real pressure on our dairy industry also comes to this takeover. It's got to also go before the Foreign Investment Review Board. Lion had been trying to sell this business for almost 2 years, so it was desperate. The value, it paid $2 billion for it going back about 5 years ago. It sold for $600 million.
Okay. Before we go ahead with that, I'll give you a bit of background on why the dairy farmers are pulling out of the industry. Basically, there was a price war with the two major supermarkets, basically doing $1 a litre for the milk, and it was below the production costs. So they were actually making a loss selling it to Coles and Woolworths and so forth. And a lot of farmers went broke, but China's pretty smart. I can see what they're doing here. That they make importing milk into their country very difficult, and then because I'm sure the Chinese would buy it for more than $1 a litre, they could sell a lot of it to the Chinese, but they don't want to. What they do is they wait until the farmers go broke, and then they just buy their farms up, and then they can import it into their country at massive prices, and then of course it's on the global free market economy, free market prices, and so all the prices will go up locally, and it's just very clever and quite sinister, really, when you think about it, because that's what will happen. And Ross Greenwood, he talks about this as well, and I'll do some commentary as we go along.
That's how tough this industry is. My question, as Mengniu comes in, Mengniu's this fast-growing Chinese company. Now, the one thing about Mengniu is it says it's going to grow Australia's dairy industry. And I say big thumbs up for that. That's great for our dairy farmers.
Okay. Well, I dispute this. I don't think they're going to grow the industry because we're in the middle of a drought. We're having trouble feeding the cattle as we speak, huge issues with water and so forth. Unless they're going to take over all the water infrastructure as well, and and sort all that out. But so I don't think it's as easy as they're going to expand the dairy industry. My prediction is if they get this foreign takeover deal, they'll just export all the milk that we own in Australia, and as Ross Greenwood points out in a minute, we'll be forced to drink powdered milk, which doesn't taste too palatable, does it?
But the big question I've got is whether that milk will actually go here to Australians or whether it will actually go back to China as milk to them. Because one thing when I'm talking to dairy farmers around the country last night is many of them believe in the future Australians might not get the fresh milk that we've known all of our lives, and in the future we might increasingly start to drink powdered milk because of a shortage of fresh milk here in Australia. As I say, we're already importing dairy products. This situation, especially with drought, is likely to only get worse into the future.
So do you think that Mengnew's grand plan in the long term here would be to export more milk out of Australia?
I think that's exactly right. Remember that Lion is the second biggest dairy processor in Australia. And so as a result of that, it's got about 20% of the market share in this country. Now, the truth is, if you grow that, that's fantastic. It's a brilliant thing for the dairy farmers who might sell more milk to that processor. But it's what that processor does with that milk that becomes absolutely vital, because quite clearly, they'll try and make as much money as they possibly can and go to the markets where there's the biggest demand for that product as well. And the question about whether Australians are like that, to me, in some ways, it reminds me of the gas industry when we built those giant plants up at Gladstone. And despite the fact that we're one of the biggest gas producers in the world, we have gas shortages down the east coast of Australia right now.
Yep, hoping the same won't happen with milk. Ross, it's great to talk to you.
No problems at all.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll explain the gas thing as well. Natural gas, we can produce heaps and heaps of natural gas in Australia, but we actually sign contracts to export it to Japan, and they actually buy our gas like I think it's like half the price that we can actually we actually pay more for our own gas than what we export it to Japan for. So everyone's not too happy with that either, because we're trying to close down our coal-fired power stations and go into natural gas, but it's too pricey now. So yeah, whoops, get my video back up. Right, so with the Chinese dairy industry, I don't think they're gonna. What will happen is they'll only expand the industry once they've got complete control of it. That's my theory. They don't do things to benefit Australia. People that think that they're not investors. Now, there's a term going around since I think it was 2012. I'll show you this article where it sort of comes up all the time. What are we doing here? Preview. Go to Safari here. Comes up all the time. This where are we? Let's say this South China Morning Post instructs its journalists to curb the use of locust term used to describe mainland China. So comes up a lot. It's sort of like a derogatory term for Chinese mainlanders. They call them locusts because they basically go in and you know what locusts do? They go in and they just decimate an area. They decimate an area. They go in and feed off of the area, and then what's left is just nothing, like barren wasteland. And that's what they're going to do to Australia. They'll just use all our milk up, and then move on, or they'll only expand it once they own all the assets. They're not going to help our farmers, that's for sure. No way. So here we go. So the term locust, this is quite interesting. The term locust was coined by anti-Beijing campaign group Hong Kong Golden Forum in 2012, which accused mainland Chinese of stripping the territory of its resources in a press ad. Sounds quite familiar, doesn't it? Stripping the resources. So for all my Chinese trolls here that are going to turn up. Oops, hang on. There you go, have a read of that. Let's get it a decent size there. Don't know why it zoomed that quickly. I can't speak Chinese. I don't know what it says, but there we go. But another interesting thing I found was this article, which I've known about. I reckon came across this article. Let's see what year it was. 2016. Yeah, that's about right. That's how long I've known about it for as well. It says China to invest $450 billion in agriculture. Because I had this figure going around, I thought it was $3 trillion, but what it was is 3 trillion yuan. So that translates to $450 billion. So basically the Chinese Communist Party have put away all this money to, quite rightly, secure their food futures, food security they call it. And it's global. They're going to take over every bit of agricultural land they can. They're going to try and develop it locally, but the Chinese people don't trust the quality of food that's coming out of China. They much prefer like Australian produce, New Zealand produce, Canadian produce, French, Italian, that sort of thing. So yeah, this is what's going to happen in the future. They're just going to take over every bit of food that they can and export it straight back to China. Basically, just take it over. So we're just going to be like a proxy arm of the Chinese mainland. It's just going to create food for them with no real benefit to us. Once it's not going to. How's it going to benefit us? It's not going to benefit the host country. Now, what else was I going to talk about? Yeah, it's the same sort of thing happened with, because in South Australia we've got like the best southern bluefin tuna in the world in Port Lincoln. That's why you get so many sharks there, because they feed off the tuna. They chase the tuna up and down the Gulf, and you'll never find tinned South Australian tuna in Adelaide. We used to have SAFCOL, South Australian Fish Co-op or something, Co-op Limited, I think it was. And you'd think that tuna was South Australian, but it's not. It's actually all from Thailand. A whole lot's from Thailand. Now, you cannot buy one little bit of tuna from South Australia. It all goes to Japan and probably China as well, but mainly Japan for sushi. They get all the best tuna. So I just don't. This is one thing I don't like about free market economies. Don't like about the world free market is the host country, might get richer in one aspect, but we sell off. Basically, what I think should happen is only surplus should be exported. But when you get a free market, it's like, well, why are you going to supply the local market? Say if I had 1 kilo of tuna, I'm only going to get $20 a kilo here, but I'm going to get $1,000 if I export it to Japan. You know what I mean? It's like, of course I'm going to export it to Japan. So I'm not too sure what the answer is, but the local markets suffer whenever you have a free market economy like this. The local markets suffer. We don't actually eat the produce that's produced locally, which is a real shame, isn't it? It's like we could have all this fresh produce, and it's basically the people with the most money gets to buy it. And I just don't think that's right. I don't know about you guys. Just comment below. Do you think that's a fair thing to happen? That we just sell off all our food to China and Japan and so forth, or should we be protecting industries and get them to supply locally first before they export overseas? Alright, I think that'll do for this video. Leave your comments below. I'll be interested to know what you all think. And don't forget to share, like and subscribe. Okay, cheers.